In this episode of the Smart Community Podcast, I have a great chat with Corr, a community engagement and development specialist and the founder and executive director of Make a Change Australia. Karen and I met when we were both on a panel together. We were talking about Liveability. This was at the Bendigo Invention and Innovation Festival earlier in 2019. In this episode, Karen shares with us her journey from being a water engineer to becoming passionate about culture change. We discuss the power of engaging with the smartness of the people that live in regional communities and harnessing their local knowledge for ownership of smart solutions. Karen and I chat about the need for equity of access to livability, connectivity, and accessibility in small regional towns and areas. Karen tells us about the Ramp Up Resilience project she's been working on, and she also explains how much time and energy authentic integration and engagement actually takes, and that we need to be investing in this more. We finish our chat discussing the emerging trends of changing the language we use to engage with currently unheard voices in our communities, and also of flipping the engagement conversation on its head so that it's community-led and not government-led. This episode is part of the Spotlight on the Regions that we're focusing on for December, and I really hope you enjoy this one. As always, we hope you enjoy listening to this episode as much as we enjoyed making it.
Welcome to the smart community, smart regions, smart towns, and smart cities. It's where we live, work, and play. With smart communities, the future starts today. Big data, smart mobility, emerging trends galore. The Smart Community Podcast is what you're looking for.
Hello, Karen. How are you today?
I'm really good, thanks, Zoe. How are you?
I am fabulous. It's actually a beautiful day here in Toowoomba.
Great.
Okay, let's just jump straight in. And can you tell us about your background and what you're passionate about?
Sure. So I founded an organisation called Make a Change Australia, and that's all about supporting people in local communities to create positive change across health and wellbeing, environment, and social disadvantage issues. And that came about because, well, actually, I'm an engineer by training and I love problem solving. So I was problem solving in like the field of water modelling and water engineering. And then I thought, well, if we're going to solve water, I started to work in the area of climate change and we need to start thinking about climate change. And then I started to work as a volunteer in local community sustainability groups and saw, actually, if we're going to solve climate change, we need culture change. So I'm really passionate about supporting people to create change across some of those big, big issues.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I didn't realize you were an engineer. I'm also an engineer, so it's great.
There you go.
Well, let's go to what sparked your interest in this smart cities and community space. I know you don't work in that space directly, but I guess from a livability perspective and how we kind of ended up on a panel together in Bendigo, maybe if you give a bit of insight into that.
Yeah, sure. So I suppose one of the things that I see is huge that's needed in the smart cities space is how do we involve people? And that's a lot about what I do with the work in Make a Change, is looking at ways that we can continually engage and involve people wherever they're at. So how do we, if we're going to be putting new technology in or new solutions in cities and making cities livable, how do we ensure that everyone is brought along with that? So that even includes, taking out jargon language so the everyday person can understand it. How do people find out about these things and get involved so they don't miss out as well?
Absolutely. I love that. What is a smart city or a smart community to you?
Yeah, for me, it's actually tuning into the smartness of the people that live in the communities. So for me, it's really, it's huge. It could be a lot of things, but for me, it's tapping into that local knowledge and having local people come up with the solutions. But also I know there's lots of solutions out there that aren't necessarily going to come from local communities as well, but having their take on it and their ownership on it. So, I think for me, a smart city is more along the lines of a livable city, something that's along the lines of it's great environmentally, it's great socially, so people are connected to each other. They've got things that they do in their own neighbourhood and their communities, and it's also to do with them being healthy and well as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to change this question to kind of why do you think livability is so important?
So, I mean, everyone is living in cities to have a great life. Livability is basically having a great life and doing the things that you want to do and be able to do and have access to. So I think it's fundamental to everyday, it's fundamental to all of our lives really, is making sure our city, we all travel from home to work, we all do social things, we get involved in things, our interests and hobbies. So, yeah, and that's all so that we can have a fulfilling and great life.
Because it's kind of like asking, why is water, I guess, essential? Or, why is water important? And it's just this essential, fundamental, basic need. And I think livability is and gaining traction in that space as well. And one thing we talked about in the panel was that connectivity piece. And again, connectivity being kind of another essential service that we need, which is where I see, the smart communities concept kind of really feeding into a livable community.
Yeah, definitely. And you think about like in regional, there's small towns that don't have access to as good essential services and infrastructure as, say, some of the bigger cities. So I think it's really important that, that concept gets taken to the regional and smaller towns as well. It almost becomes like an equality thing at some point, and it's harder because there's less funds available when there's smaller populations. But I think it's even more essential because, there's more instances of disadvantage and that kind of thing. And, we need to be thinking how we can apply it more to those smaller regional towns.
Absolutely. And at the moment, there's lots of focus on cities, which is fine, but we're increasing the digital divide. And I think the more focus needs to be, okay, that's great in a city area, and we always need those to be working more efficiently and making sure that we've got that livability aspect. But yes, then how do we direct some of that energy to our regional areas so then we're not increasing that digital divide even further, because it's a fundamental issue, and not only just in Australia, I think across the globe, it's something that we need to be thinking about a lot more.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. Okay. How do you think that Australia is currently embracing the smart community concept?
It's hard to know because I'm not necessarily one tuned into the smart city from the technology perspective as much. So, but I do a lot of work in local communities. I run events and initiatives that help bring people together from different backgrounds and different interests and we run training on helping people how to implement projects in their community better and better. And it does definitely come up in conversations with that, especially when people that I'm talking to around talking about renewable energy and community-owned renewable energy solutions as well. So from my experience, I hear it a bit. So with your question about how do you think Australia is embracing it, I think some people are, but I don't actually know how well it's embedded, more broadly. I think if you're in that sector, you probably are tuning into it a lot more. And I think definitely people are more aware that the need for smart technology and smarter, internet and things like that. But I don't know if they're fully aware of what's possible.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'll just be interested to hear what you think about that with your background.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think because I, live and breathe it every day, I forget that it's not something that people in the general community aren't thinking about or don't really know or understand what it even is. And that's a problem to me and I started doing it in the smart city, like when I was talking smart city all the time. And then when I would talk to people in the community, I'd say smart city, you just like get a completely blank look. And it's just like, what? That's not my conversation kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with that.
So then I started using the word smart community. And that's why I rebranded to Smart Community Podcasts in November last year. Because when I say smart community, people don't just switch off completely. They kind of go, oh, what does that mean? And because the word community, essentially means human beings and people and connection is the way I saw it. People go, oh, community, I know what a community is. And so then they just have to deal with the smart part. Whereas when you say smart city together, I mean, obviously people know what a city is, but it's not a human thing. it's one, I don't live in particularly in regional areas. One, if you say city, it's nearly like a swear word.
Yes.
So, and I haven't come up with a better term than smart. So that's what it is at the moment. But yeah, I think what I've found is, and obviously I talk to people all the time about this concept, but I'm trying to really bring different voices into the conversation, because it's not just a tech conversation. It's much, much, much more than that. And we need the tech to enable these initiatives, but only if tech is appropriate for that type of initiative. So the stuff that you're doing, the stuff that people are doing in health and well-being, and using different ways of thinking and different ways of working, for me, is what smart community really is. I guess the other thing is, we can talk at very high levels, and ideally it could be like this, and utopian and blah blah blah, but that's great, but that's not super useful. So you need some of those practical things as well. So we need the budget, we need the resources. We do need people that bring different skill sets in, but then you need somebody to be able to corral those skill sets and corral those ideas and then action those ideas. And then you need the people that have the deep technical understanding, so then we can actually code it and make it happen, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think there's, this grassroots thing that's happening with really awesome organizations bringing the people and getting excited. And then you've got government doing some really cool stuff and giving out funding and that type of thing. But now the next phase is kind of like, okay, how do we make it sustainable, and in all senses of the word? So I think smart community is just sexy sustainability. It's got tech, so it's sexy now. But really we need economic sustainability. So you can't just do something because it's a great idea, but if it doesn't make any money, or can't continue to sustain a business for somebody who's working in that community, then that's not going to work, depending on what model they choose. So there's all these different business models. And then, you've got your people, which obviously you need social. We need those connections. We need human connections. And then the environment. We need to factor those things in when we're doing these smart community, smart city, whatever, or anything solutions going forward. So I think that's what's happening. I think the conversation is shifting, which I like, to more integrate kind of social enterprise and smart cities, which I really like.
That's great. Yeah, I'm really excited about the potential, because being connected with so many community-minded people, and we run events in, say, small regional towns on a freezing cold winter's night, and we can, draw 80 people or more, which some people tell me that's a miracle, because normally they'd get 3 people turning up. But what I think is really exciting about that is we've been able to know how to build momentum and excite people about things and get them thinking differently. And that could be as simple as, how are we going to create, I don't know, just as an example, Bendigo, we did one, Bendigo, a cycling city, and we brought lots of people together about how we can make Bendigo more of a cycling city. But the potential to then get them engaged in the new technology and new smart solutions to better improve the livability of the city is very exciting to me.
No, absolutely. And I think that engagement is so, so key in all levels, right? And I think that's the biggest thing here, is when people get it, people in the community. And again, it doesn't have to be called smart city or smart community or whatever. It's really about community building and maintaining, and not doing things the way we've always done them, sounds exactly like what you're doing, Karen.
Yeah, definitely. And thinking about how, if there's a solution that's a technology solution, how does that get framed and messaged and communicated so that it connects with the everyday person? That's the biggest thing that's going to actually bring people along. That's the bit that I love working in.
Yeah, no, and totally. And I agree. I think you can have the best idea in the world, but if it doesn't connect with your community, whichever market you're trying to enter, then it's not going to work, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And we need to think the same, if it's a product, but then also a community, they both have the same outcome at the end of the day. We want more engaged people, and will engage with your product or in the community. So yes, I think there's lots of things we can learn from traditionally commercial kind of backgrounds or whatever in this public sector space, and all the people working together in that space as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, well, tell us about some of the projects and things that you're currently working on.
Okay. So currently I'm working on been delivering a project this year called Ramp Up Resilience. So that's been working with people across 3 shires in central Victoria, where we've done a whole lot of different things to get the conversations going in community about climate change and solutions that people can take on to address the challenges and impacts of climate change. And that could be anything from you put implementing renewable energy to address one of the impacts is higher energy prices. So it could be a renewable energy solution, but then it could be things like looking at how a community can respond more effectively in an extreme weather event, because with climate change, there's going to be more extreme weather events, and especially in central Victoria, it's like floods is a big thing, and so is fire and heat waves. So sort of like that addressing mitigation, solutions to stop climate change from happening further, and then solutions to deal with the impacts that are happening and are already happening. So that's been really interesting because we've been out and about talking to lots of people, and not everyone is sold on the idea of that climate change is an issue. But what we've done is started talking to people about, what do you reckon about the weather? And do you notice the weather? So we really made it just about to start with about daily weather. And that actually was really good because it meant that we could have conversations, because a lot of people think climate change is like a political, as soon as you say, oh, I think climate change is happening, they feel like they're going to be boxed into some political view. But when you talk about the weather, a lot of the conversations came about that, yes, we understand that the seasons are changing, but they wouldn't necessarily call it climate change. So it's really been really interesting. And then what we've done is run forums and training for people that are interested in actually implementing ideas. And that's been a fantastic way to bring different people together, learning from each other and seeing how they can make what they're trying to achieve even more effective.
Yeah, cool. So do you work with the local governments or state governments for a project like that?
Yeah, so this project came about for some work that we did for state government agency, Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning, and also some work with Emergency Management Victoria. And they said to us, we understand that with climate change, the regional communities are going to be more impacted. What can we do to more educate people and have them thinking about what they can do as well? So that's why we developed this program. And then what we did was pulled together all these partners. So it was local government, so 3 shires, plus the Water Authority, plus the Catchment Management Authority, plus some other groups that had, like the Bendigo Sustainability came on board as well, because they're doing this amazing community-owned renewable energy solution. So we brought all these partners together, got some philanthropic funding. 2.5 years later, we had a project. So yeah, my work, sometimes the projects take a long time to get off the ground. But this is gaining a lot of momentum, and what we did this year was a pilot program, and now we're looking to take it further and delve deeper into the towns and just even ramp up resilience even more.
Cool. No, that sounds really interesting, and I really love that. Changing the language, because the language isn't the important thing, right? It's actually getting engagement and the outcome or the results that you want at the end.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why we called it Ramp Up Resilience, because we knew that some of the communities we're talking to don't connect with the term climate change. And actually, when you think about what it is we're trying to achieve, it is, I think resilience probably fits well with livability too, because it's an important part, because in times of trouble, a community, the more connected they are and the more capacity they have, the more able to respond to emergencies and troubled times. They can band together and deal with them a lot better and then bounce back a lot better.
Awesome. Look, it kind of leads to this next question. So how do you think we can better integrate across the different disciplines, government, industry and community?
Yeah, I love this question because that's a lot of what we do too. One thing I think that helps is when running, say, discussions on particular, issues, if it is a smart city conversation, it's like having people come from the different sectors or different interest groups together, because that way, there's a lot to be learned from connecting. Like often you'll go to something that might be more focused on government or more focused on, say, people that are in decision-making roles, like heads of businesses and things like that. But actually what I find really interesting is when you bring people along they might be everyday people, they might be small business owners, or they might be working, the local neighbourhood house. But if you bring them, they've got so much intel on the ground that could input and help with addressing like some of the challenges a lot better, because you get these insights that you just wouldn't otherwise hear about. So yeah, I think definitely starting with those, you know, when there's running forums and things like that, making sure also hearing presentations from people that you wouldn't necessarily think that you would hear presentations from as well to get their perspectives. What else? I mean, there's a lot of things that we can do, but yeah, I think also in terms of the listening to people. So if, say, a government is trying to implement something, a lot of the times we see governments they're saying they're doing engagement with the different groups to get their thoughts on things. But a lot of the time it's kind of can be tokenistic because, you know, they've got to fulfill their, you know, tick their boxes to say, oh, we're going to engage with these people, but actually making it much more authentic and probably investing more into those conversations and into this engagement, because it actually takes a lot of time and effort having conversations with people, but I think it's essential. And also making sure that you are getting that cross-discipline in those conversations. So it takes time to go out and meet and build up those relationships and get the input from the different groups, as opposed to the ones that always, if there's people that are passionate about smart cities, for example, I'll just use that as an example, then they're always going to be the ones that respond to things that get put out there about, here, we'd love your opinion on that. It takes a lot more time and effort to go and reach people that wouldn't normally tune into that conversation. And I think if we want to integrate across disciplines more, we need to invest more in the work that it takes to integrate more. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think while you were talking, I was just thinking that, you know, that's a really human skill. The technology will help us to do that, but to actually design those things and have the real conversations, the face-to-face ones that will be needed and that type of thing, it's a really human skill. And it's something that once we have more efficiencies in the things that don't need human input necessarily, then hopefully we have more resources to be able to invest in those human aspects and those skills that we will really need, and invest in the time to be able to talk to people and reach those unheard voices, because they are so key in this space.
Definitely. Yeah, it's such a good point when you're talking about, making the systems more efficient where we don't need that human input as much. And yeah, it is, you can easily see, you know, old systems in whether it's government departments or other large organisations, and other, probably doesn't necessarily have to be just government and large organisations, but just the systems in general, older. You can see new technologies now that are making things so much more efficient where, it doesn't need that human interaction. And I think that's really exciting to think, well, wow, imagine if we don't need as much in those areas and we can transfer that and invest in that human element, because, I think that's not done enough at the moment. So, I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, and something you were saying before about bringing, you know, the people that you don't normally hear from, or the local insights that you get. I often say that the community is already smart. You just need to give them the tools to be able to tell you what it is that you need to know, which is where I see that smart community thing happening. And you can only do that if you do the engagement. And one of those tools is the ability to be engaged and engage with the decision makers.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, the tools, combined with the engagement and the conversations, that's huge.
Okay, so what are the emerging trends that people aren't talking about enough? I mean, I think the work that you do sometimes, because we're in it all the time, can just seem, you know, normal. But I do think it's an emerging trend that we change the language to suit the people and not just expect people to engage with this, you know, high-level language that doesn't mean anything to them, and we go, oh, well, they're not engaged in climate change or whatever, but it's because the political nature of the whole thing or whatever. And, you know, do we then just go, oh, well, they don't deserve to be part of this conversation? Well, no, because it really affects them. So I think what you're doing is kind of an emerging trend that we're not talking about enough, which is how do we change the language so then we do get those unheard voices into the conversation?
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, I suppose you're right. I hadn't thought about my work as an emerging trend, but in some respects it is as well, because we're still having to educate our, you know, if we're working with, say, local government or state government agencies, we do need to educate them on how to better engage and connect with communities. There is a lot of talk about, we need to do more community engagement and we need to what is it? Oh, there's a buzzword, community-led solutions, which I use as well, by the way. But what actually is that? And that is the space that we're working on, because our approach, say, with engagement isn't about talking to someone to get their input into a strategy that, say, a government is working on. What we do is go into the communities and say, hey, what's important to you? What would you like to see? How to support them in making it happen? And then work with the government agencies to say, this is what they're talking about, and then finding the links with their agendas and then having them go, oh, yes, actually, this is actually really important and we can support in this way or that way. So it's kind of like, the way I look at it, it's like flipping engagement on its head in a way, because it's coming from what's important to the community first, as opposed to, although the government are trying to do things that are meant to be supporting the community, which is great, the engagement is flipping it so that the community can get engaged because it's important to them. So for me, that's actually an emerging trend that we need to talk more about.
No, absolutely. And it's an interesting way to think about it. And when you ask the community what's important to them, do you get a coherent response? I just think if someone asks me what's important to me, I find or do we strategically set some kind of parameters or something?
Yeah, I suppose we don't actually directly ask that question. We also don't, it's not like we're not necessarily asking the broad community, we're asking individuals within a community, but making that individual question, taking it to as many people as we can. So then you kind of hear what's important. So we might say, okay, we're working on, so for just using the Ramp Up Resilience project as an example, one of the earlier parts to this program, we're asking people, what does resilience mean to you? And some people didn't even know what the word means, because it is another buzzword that's being used a lot. But once we got talking, then they would start talking about what it actually means to them. And then things out of that you'd get to hear what's important to them just through their answers. Because one might have been talking about, we had a forum where we had someone talk about, for them, what was really important was telling the stories of people who have been affected by bushfire. And that was really powerful, because what they ended up doing was going and interviewing people that had been impacted by the bushfire, and it was really moving. But they just said, we need to hear from their story if we're going to learn from that for next time. But also it was a way for those individuals to heal after a very traumatic period. So just by asking a strategic question, it generates conversation, and then you just get to hear where that person's passion lies and what's important to them for their community.
Absolutely. It's such a great way. I mean, obviously absolutely devastating, and using that then to start this really rich kind of deep conversation with the community about these issues that are happening to them.
Definitely. And it does link in with smart communities, because once you hear what's important to them, and then if people are thinking about what would make a difference for those communities, say, just using this bushfire as an example, are there technologies and things out there or better ways to communicate in a times of an emergency so that people aren't left behind? I mean, in the Black Saturday fires, there were people that died. It was devastating. And I know there's projects going on now that are thinking about how do we make sure no one gets left behind in a community. And maybe, there's solutions out there in the technology space, in the smart cities and smart communities space that could address that those communities don't know about yet. But knowing then that that's important to them as a start is a good way to start thinking about, well, what are the solutions out there that could assist with that?
Absolutely. And I think, it's one of the reasons I started the podcast, so then someone can hear this and then go, oh, actually, I know, I live in wherever and we have bushfires all the time, and this is the system that we use, and, we've been using it really successfully, and this is what we've learned, and la, la, la. And just being able to make those connections, and then also realizing that we do need to do this research piece behind it to kind of go, there's not necessarily an off-the-shelf solution all the time, but how do you mold and shape it so then it's actually what your community needs?
Yeah, definitely.
Well, it's been so great to chat with you, Karen. Thanks so much for coming onto the podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me. Yeah, it's been a great conversation. It's definitely given me lots of food for thought too.
Excellent. I just have one last question, which is, how can people connect with you?
So, yeah, they can jump on our website, which is www.makeachange.org.au. I'm also Karen Corr. I'm on LinkedIn. You can find Make a Change Australia on Facebook and Instagram as well. Just search Make a Change Australia. Yeah, I'd love to connect with everyone.
Sounds awesome. Well, thanks again for coming onto the podcast. And yeah, I look forward to our next conversation. We're definitely going to have a chat about this, linking the everyday person to a smart community professional.
Sounds awesome. Yeah, look forward to it. And thanks so much.
No worries. We'll talk again soon.
Great. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
The Smart Community podcast is brought to you by My Smart Community. If you're trying to deal with disruption, not sure what technologies to buy, need to facilitate genuine collaboration, then we can help. Email hello@mysmart.community or head to www.mysmart.community/consulting.
Thanks so much for listening to the Smart Community Podcast. Show notes for this episode and all other episodes are available on our website, mysmart.community/podcasts. If you have any questions for us or any of our guests, you can email hello@mysmart.community. You can also find us on the socials. We are on LinkedIn and Twitter @SmartCommHQ. That's Comm with 2 M's. If you are enjoying the podcast, please hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. And we would love for you to leave us a rating and review at wherever you listen. This really helps us reach more ears and eyes, so thank you for your support. As always, we hope you enjoyed listening to this episode as much as we enjoyed making it.
The Smart Community Podcast is what you're looking for.